Hey guys, tonight we're plunging into the darkest job description history ever coughed up, the medieval executioner. Tonight you're the unlucky soul in charge of separating heads from shoulders, scraping confessions out of criminals and, let's be honest, cleaning up more mess than a daycare after spaghetti night. This isn't a glamorous gig. You don't get a fancy hat, you don't get applause, and the only benefits are job security and a guaranteed seat by yourself at every village party. Before you get too cozy, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy this kind of content. Drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and how late it is. Now, dim those lights. Crank up your fan for the comforting hum of medieval denial and settle in. Get comfortable. After all, tonight you're about to find out. How did you get this job? Did anyone actually want to be the executioner? What did a day at the office look like when your office was a wooden scaffold and the only co-workers were nervous priests and angry mobs? How did you deal with, all the gore? Did you ever get a day off? Did the executioner's kids make friends? What did people really think about you? Were you feared, respected, or just quietly avoided like expired milk? Did you ever sleep well? Or did the ghosts of slightly decapitated tax evaders keep you up at night? Congratulations. You've just woken up in the year 1378. You're clutching a rusty axe, your neighbours won't make eye contact, and you have blood on your shoes. Welcome to your new life. Good luck. There's no medieval LinkedIn for executioners. You don't grow up dreaming of swinging an axe for the local lord. Usually you inherit the gig after your uncle retires, read dies of mysterious causes, or you drew the short straw at the wrong town meeting. Sometimes the job is a punishment itself. Congratulations, your new title comes with a free set of manacles and a permanent social stigma. Let's be honest, nobody wakes up in 1378 thinking, what I'd really love is a career where everyone avoids me at the bakery. In medieval society, being the executioner is the ultimate other duties as assigned. You didn't apply, you were simply chosen. Maybe your grandfather slipped up and offended the local lord, or your dad owed someone money and this was the fastest way to pay off the family debt. Just add a few public hangings to the bill and suddenly, congratulations, your bloodline is on permanent axe duty. Occasionally you might find yourself volunteered at a town meeting after the previous executioner had a fatal disagreement with gravity and a slippery scaffold. The local lord scans the crowd for anyone who looks reasonably sturdy and not currently fleeing. If you make the mistake of holding eye contact for too long, that's it. That's your resume. The rest of your life is now one long, awkward job orientation. Sometimes the job is given as a punishment. Did you steal a chicken? Did you insult the wrong monk? Instead of chopping off your hand, the town gets creative. You get to keep your limbs, but you're now in charge of removing everyone else's. This isn't exactly upward mobility, it's more like downward social mobility in heavy chains, with the townsfolk crossing themselves every time you pass by. The truth is, executioners existed in a weird medieval paradox. You were desperately needed, but nobody actually wanted to know you. Justice had to be served, laws had to be enforced, but preferably by someone who didn't live too close to the main square. Sometimes you'd even find yourself living just outside the village, or right on the town's border. It wasn't for the view, it was so people could say, "He's not really one of us," just in case something went wrong. You weren't quite a peasant, but you weren't exactly invited to dinner with the nobility either. If your family had been in the business for generations, well, you might learn the craft the way other families pass down recipes. This is how you tie a proper noose, son, and here's how you keep your axe sharp through a long winter. By the way, never eat stew made by anyone who won't look you in the eye. Family bonding, medieval edition. Occasionally you'd inherit the job with a bit of ceremony, a battered black hood, a chipped axe, and a firm handshake from the mayor who immediately wipes his hand on his robe. No training, no salary negotiation, just an implied "don't mess up or else." Sometimes the only advice you got was from the last executioner, who'd say something vague like, "Mind the crowds, they bite." The social stigma was, let's say, intense. You're the necessary evil. The villagers might watch your work with morbid fascination, but at the market you might as well be a leper covered in bees. People don't make small talk. Some cross themselves. Others just cross the street. If you try to buy bread, the baker hands it to you with tongs and prays quietly under his breath. Yet here you are. You didn't pick this life. But now you're the one the sheriff wakes up when the law needs enforcing. You're both respected and reviled. A walking contradiction with blood on your boots. In a way, you're a living reminder that, in medieval times, the job you least want is often the one you end up with. And there's no transfer request form. There's just you, your axe, and a town pretending you don't exist until they really, really need you. The sun creeps over the thatch roofs, roosters crow, and somewhere in the village someone is already sharpening a blade. You wake up with a knot in your stomach, half from dread and half from last night's questionable stew. You check your tools, you check your nerves, you try not to think about breakfast. There's a certain chill in the air that has nothing to do with the weather. Maybe it's nerves, or maybe it's the fact that you slept in a drafty cottage on a lumpy sack stuffed with hay that you keep telling yourself is just straw and definitely not moving. But today isn't like every other day. You're not tilling a field, mending a fence, or patching your leaking roof. Today, you're expected to climb up on a creaky scaffold and remind the entire town what happens if you annoy the local lord. You sit up, careful not to knock over the little chest where you keep your tools of the trade. There's the axe, a bit rusty around the edges, not for dramatic effect, but because medieval life is one long exercise in managing disappointment. There's the rope, the backup rope, because if you've learned anything, it's that you always need a backup, and your battered leather apron. You give each item a once-over, pretending you're not thinking about what you'll need them for in a few hours. You hear voices drifting in through the tiny cracks in your wall. The neighbours are already up, and you know what they're talking about. Not the weather, not the harvest, not even the goat that keeps escaping. No, they're talking about you, or rather about the execution. They never mention you by name. Better not to get too familiar with the one who swings the axe. You splash your face with cold water from a cracked basin, just enough to wake up, but not enough to feel truly clean. Medieval hygiene is about managing the illusion of cleanliness, after all. You'd like to eat, but the thought of food sits heavy in your gut. Bread that's a few days old, maybe a hunk of cheese, but your appetite isn't playing along. Instead, you take a few careful sips of weak ale. Not for courage, just for survival. The water, as always, is more lethal than your axe. As you pull on your work clothes, a tunic so worn it's practically see-through in spots, and your thickest cloak for a modicum of dignity, you feel the weight of what's coming. It's not just the physical weight of the axe or the rope or the thick leather apron. It's the weight of eyes. Everyone's eyes. You know, before the day is over, every villager will be watching. Some with fear, some with disgust, a few with morbid curiosity, and at least one with a sausage on a stick because executions are a social event, and why not make a day of it? Outside, the village is stirring. The baker's already at his oven, but he glances away when you pass. Kids peer at you from behind fences, then duck out of sight. Even the chickens seem to cluck with more judgment than usual. There's a hush, a kind of anticipation, like before a storm or a really bad joke. You make your way to the town square where the scaffold is being prepared. The carpenter's fixing a loose plank with all the enthusiasm of a man repairing his own future crime scene. The sheriff stands by, looking official but refusing to meet your eye. There's a strange camaraderie in not wanting to be here. You have a job and it's not a pleasant one, but someone has to do it. So you steady your nerves, grip your tools, and take a deep breath through your mouth, because the smell in the square is part livestock, part spilled ale, and part impending doom. Today isn't just any Monday. Today you're not just waking up. You're waking up to the fact that, in medieval times, you can't call in sick, and the only person with worse job security than you is the one you're about to meet on the scaffold. Forget black hoods and leather gloves. Your uniform is a battered tunic, an apron that's seen better centuries, and a collection of stains that would make a butcher flinch. Laundry day isn't just a chore. It's a full-on crime scene investigation. You wake up to the gentle scent of mould, old sweat, and something iron-like that probably shouldn't still be clinging to the inside of your sleeves. Medieval fashion isn't about looking good. It's about surviving judgmental glances and trying not to slip on your own hem. When it's time to get dressed for work, there's no closet full of crisp, clean options. Just a choice between the less horrifying tunic and the one with the mysterious brown patch. You pick the first, knowing that whatever you wear today will look and smell considerably worse by nightfall. Your primary work accessory is a leather apron that, if fabric could talk, would be screaming for retirement. It's thick enough to stop a stray knife, but not thick enough to keep out the cold, the damp, or the existential dread. The apron's seen everything. Blood, sweat, the occasional tooth, and, on one memorable occasion, a runaway sausage from the crowd. Each stain tells a story, and none of them a good dinner conversation. Let's talk about the stains. Blood is obvious, but it's not just blood. Medieval life is, to put it kindly, unsanitary. Rope fibres, dirt, animal hair, mystery goo from the last time you had to clear a livestock thief off the gallows. Every layer of your clothing is like a poorly written biography, and nothing ever truly comes clean. Soap is expensive, water is cold and suspicious, and scrubbing your tunic in the river only seems to make the stains multiply. It's like the garment is plotting against you. Of course, some people think you wear black, mysterious, intimidating, maybe even elegant. The reality? Black dye is expensive. You're lucky if you get a dull brown or green, with streaks of unintentional tie-dye, courtesy of the last 3 executions. Anything truly black is either a hand-me-down from a richer town, or just the result of centuries of stains overlapping until all colour is gone. It's not a statement. It's a surrender. Boots? Maybe if you inherited a pair or bartered for them. More often, you're padding around in sturdy leather shoes that let in half the rain and all the gilt. No metal-toed boots or fancy buckles, just something to keep your feet above the worst of the mud, and sometimes not even that. Accessories are strictly practical. A belt to hold your apron in place, a pouch for your sharpening stone, essential since a dull blade is a public relations nightmare, and maybe a handkerchief, not for style, but for wiping sweat and occasionally tears. You'd add gloves, but let's be honest, those are for the nobles. You get calluses, splinters, and a lingering smell that even boiled lavender can't kill. Laundry day itself is a grim ritual. You drag your soiled gear down to the river, and the washerwomen all edge a little further downstream. You try to scrub away the stains, but medieval soap is made from lye and animal fat, and it's about as gentle as sandpaper wrapped around a rock. You slap your apron against a stone, watch the red water swirl away, and know deep down it's all for show. Nothing ever truly comes out. By the time you hang your uniform up to dry, on a line no one else will use, you know tomorrow you'll be back in the same battered tunic, the same cursed apron, and probably adding a few new stains to the collection. Forget fashion. Medieval executioner style is less about making a statement and more about surviving the season. If anyone asks, just tell them red is in this year. It always is, whether you like it or not. Let's set the scene. There's the iron tang of blood, the earthy aroma of mud and manure, and the unmistakable whiff of everyone's fear, including your own. No amount of rose water is covering this up. You step out of your little cottage and immediately realise that today's signature scent will not be subtle. The air is a heady stew of everything that makes medieval life, well, medieval. Smoke from last night's dying hearth, rotting hay trampled by nervous villagers, and, drifting on the breeze, the sour punch of sweat that's been building all week in your one and only work tunic. For most people, this is just background noise. For you, it's your daily perfume. It's less mystery by Dior and more desperation by medieval society. Of course, the star note in your personal bouquet is blood. The iron tang has a way of sticking around, no matter how much you try to scrub your hands in cold, suspicious water. It settles in the cracks of your skin, lingers under your fingernails and soaks into your apron until it feels like you're wearing a slightly sticky curtain. Soap is a luxury. If you're lucky, you might get a lump of homemade lye that burns away the top layer of guilt. For everything else, you just hope a strong wind comes by. But let's not forget the mud. Medieval streets are less road and more communal compost heap. The square where you work is never just dirt, it's dirt mixed with chicken droppings, stray bits of rotten vegetable, horse apples, and whatever the local pigs have kindly contributed. Every step you take is a squelch. If you drop your axe, don't bother picking it up. Just dig a new one out of the mud pile tomorrow. The manure isn't just from animals either. Medieval sanitation is what happens when nobody is in charge and everyone is in denial. Human waste is tossed out windows, usually with a half-hearted shout that never quite reaches the people it's supposed to warn. So on any given day, you're walking through puddles you'd rather not investigate. All of it gets on your shoes. All of it follows you home. Fabrizi won't be invented for 600 years. Until then, it's eau de medieval regret. Then, layered on top, is fear. It's a real thing, fear, thick enough to smell. Before every execution, you catch the unmistakable, almost sour whiff of panic. It rises from the condemned, but also from the crowd. Nobody's immune. Some folks clutch sprigs of herbs to their faces, pretending to be stoic while secretly trying not to breathe through their noses. Others just faint outright. You can't blame them. It's like breathing inside an old boot that's also seen too much. You too have your own contribution to the scent profile. A little bit of flop sweat, a dash of nerves, and the particular anxiety that comes from knowing an entire village will judge you by how well you do your job today. Nothing like performance anxiety, medieval style. Sure, the priest douses the scaffold with holy water now and then, but let's be honest, it just smells like wet wood and disappointed saints. By the end of the day, you're carrying the full bouquet. Iron, fear, filth, a hint of bad onions, and something that might be despair. And when you finally trudge home, people give you a wide berth. Not just because of what you do, but because you're a walking cautionary tale for anyone who thinks medieval life smells like fresh bread and wildflowers. So you close your door, hang up your tunic by the fire, and try not to gag as you catch a whiff of yourself. In a time before deodorant, perfume, or even regular baths, being the medieval executioner is a masterclass in olfactory endurance. If anyone ever asks, just say the job stinks, literally and figuratively, and as you drift off to sleep, surrounded by the ghostly traces of another day's regrets, you wonder if maybe, just maybe, tomorrow will smell a little less like history. Spoiler, it won't. You sit down to breakfast, if you have the stomach for it. Bread so stale you could use it as a weapon, cheese with more blue veins than a noble's legs, and watery ale because, ironically, water will kill you faster than the job. In theory, breakfast is supposed to be the most important meal of the day. In medieval reality, it's more of a dare. You stare down your morning rations and try not to make eye contact with the greenish fuzz forming a small ecosystem on your bread. Slicing it is less about nourishment and more about testing the limits of your knife. Medieval bread has two settings, rock hard or just plain rock. If you're lucky, you'll chip off a chunk without breaking a tooth. If you're unlucky, congratulations, you've invented medieval granola. Next comes the cheese, which, if you're an optimist, you call aged. If you're a realist, you call it science experiment. It's streaked with blue and green, smells vaguely of feet, and oozes in ways that cheese should never ooze. Still, it's got calories. And beggars, especially ones with your job title, can't be choosers. You cut off a piece, give it a suspicious sniff, and try to ignore the movement. Protein, you remind yourself grimly as you pop it in your mouth. On the table, a mug of ale wobbles with promise. You take a cautious sip. It's thin, slightly sour, and tastes of disappointment, with a lingering aftertaste of, at least it's not water. Everyone in the Middle Ages knows the water will give you something. Typhoid, dysentery, or a sudden urge to write your will. The ale's low on alcohol, high on survival, and the local brewmaster is only half joking when he calls it life insurance in a cup. Even the kids drink it. No one's happy about this, but hey, it's liquid and it won't kill you, at least not right away. If you're feeling extravagant, maybe you add a bit of onion, or a spoonful of pottage left over from last night's dinner. The pottage is a mysterious stew that's been simmering since the last full moon. It contains whatever was lying around, cabbage, root vegetables, perhaps a suspiciously tough bit of meat if someone's goat went missing. You're not asking questions. You eat it because it's warm, vaguely filling, and has enough salt to make you forget about flavour. Some mornings, you get lucky. A leftover scrap of dried sausage, a hard-boiled egg, maybe even a slice of bacon if the local lord is feeling generous or wants his next execution done with extra enthusiasm. But these are rare gifts. Most days your breakfast is a litany of edible regret. Eating alone is standard. Even if you have a family, they give you space at the table. Whether out of superstition or simple survival instinct, most people don't want to start their day with someone who might be swinging an axe by noon. If you do share your meal, it's with the family dog, who is notably less judgmental and more willing to eat things that even you won't touch. You chew in silence, contemplating the day ahead. The breakfast gives you just enough energy to keep moving, but not enough to feel happy about it. Your teeth ache from the bread, your stomach grumbles about the cheese, and the ale reminds you of every bad decision you've ever made. And when you finally push back from the table, you do so with a sigh, a burp, and a prayer that today's job won't require you to bend over too much. You're pretty sure that cheese is planning a rebellion. Medieval breakfast. It builds character, if not strong bones. And for the executioner, it's just another reason to envy the condemned's last meal. Your toolkit isn't glamorous. Axes that need sharpening, swords with questionable balance, ropes that might snap at the worst moment. Everything is rusty, nothing is reliable, and there's no user manual. Welcome to the morning ritual of the medieval executioner, part craftsman, part janitor, part extremely nervous amateur engineer. You sit cross-legged on the floor, sunlight streaming through the cracks in the wall, and lay out your instruments with all the reverence of someone setting up for a particularly risky science experiment. There's the big axe, chipped at the blade, a splinter in the handle threatening mutiny at every swing. You run your thumb along the edge, not exactly razor sharp, but it'll have to do, unless you want to spend the whole afternoon finishing the job while the crowd looks on in horror. Next to the axe is your sword, which, if you're honest, is less sword and more really big, heavy knife. The balance is off because it's been repaired by the blacksmith so many times, it wobbles like a goose on ice. There's a nick in the blade, a bend near the tip, and something sticky on the hilt that you don't want to investigate. This was once a proud weapon. Now it's mostly a prop in your ongoing struggle to convince the villagers that you're in control of the situation. Then there's the rope. Oh, the rope. Medieval rope is a mystery to science. One day it's sturdy as hope. The next it's fraying and snapping if you look at it wrong. You test each length, tying and untying knots, checking for hidden weaknesses. The last thing you want is a public hanging that turns into a tragic game of guess whose neck survived. The villagers are always eager for justice, but nobody likes an encore. And if the rope does fail, guess who gets the blame? Not the rope maker who is safely selling turnips somewhere. Not the sheriff, who will immediately find something else to supervise. No, it's you, standing on the scaffold holding a handful of disappointment. Of course, there's more to your toolkit. The backup rope, which you secretly don't trust any more than the first. A leather strap for tying hands. A bit stiff, because leather isn't known for its flexibility after years of neglect. A sack of sawdust, handy for soaking up, well, spillages. A sharpening stone, worn nearly smooth from years of frantic early morning grinding. Every tool has a story, and none of them end well. Sharpening your axe is a delicate, almost meditative process. You sit on your doorstep, stone in one hand, axe in the other, sending sparks into the dirt. The sound is strangely soothing. Metal scraping on stone. the soundtrack of both impending doom and medieval home improvement. You wonder if the condemned can hear it from their cell, each rasp a grim countdown. You work methodically, the motion repetitive, your mind wandering to the logistics of the day. You check for splinters, cracks, and any new signs of sabotage. You never know. Maybe someone tried to dull your blade in the night, hoping for mercy through incompetence. You have a little pouch of extras, nails, bits of twine, a bent nail that you keep for luck. It's not working. You inspect everything 3 times, not because you're a perfectionist, but because in your line of work, mistakes are both public and memorable. There's no manual for this, no helpful diagrams, no troubleshooting hotline. Your training was, here's the axe, good luck. Every repair, every adjustment is guesswork and hope, informed by years of learning what doesn't work, usually in front of a jeering crowd. And if you get it wrong, well, that's one more story for the villagers to whisper over their next mug of suspicious ale. So you finish sharpening, oil the blades with a few precious drops, coil the rope just so, and pack everything in your battered leather satchel. With a sigh, you stand up, feeling the weight of tools and the heavier weight of expectation. In the end, prepping for an execution isn't about being ready. It's about pretending you're ready, tools in hand, hoping that today at least everything holds together, literally and metaphorically. Today's entertainment, your job. Villagers, nobles, stray dogs, everyone's out to watch you work. You scan the crowd, half are here for justice, half just want to see if you'll mess up. No pressure. If you ever thought your work life was stressful, try performing under the gaze of everyone you've ever met. Execution Day isn't just about justice, it's about spectacle. The medieval town square transforms overnight from a muddy marketplace into the world's worst theatre, and you're the unwilling star. Forget applause, your best hope is for polite silence and ideally, no one fainting in the first row. Villagers arrive early, jockeying for a good spot as if there's going to be a joust and not a public reckoning. The baker's there, arms dusted with flour and face carefully neutral. The blacksmith's kids wriggle up front, wide-eyed and way too enthusiastic. Even the mayor shows up, adjusting his hat and looking for someone to blame if things go wrong. Which, let's be honest, they often do. Nobles cluster at the back, noses wrinkled, handkerchiefs pressed to their faces. They claim it's because of the smell, but you know it's really to block out the peasants' running commentary. Meanwhile, the local dogs do what dogs do best. Weave through legs, sniff suspicious puddles, and sometimes fight over the best drop sausage. Occasionally a chicken escapes someone's arms and flaps onto the scaffold. Nobody minds. It's all part of the show. As for the children, this is their Super Bowl. You can spot them in the crowd, trading wild rumours and bets about what will happen today. Some have climbed up trees or wobbly carts for a better view, and at least 2 are probably plotting a way to touch your axe when you're not looking. There's a whole village economy based on who can claim a piece of the rope afterward for luck, because nothing says good fortune like a slightly frayed, highly questionable medieval souvenir. Of course, not everyone is there for entertainment. Some people in the crowd are genuinely invested in justice, or at least the version of it that gets dished out by you. Maybe their livestock was stolen, or maybe they're hoping for a sign that crime doesn't always pay, unless, of course, you're the local lord, in which case crime pays in tax revenue. The condemned's family might be there too, faces pale and grim, trying to fade into the background and failing. The priest is on hand, muttering prayers for the soul, about to be launched heavenward, or downward, depending on the charges. The town healer, not exactly busy today, tries to look useful by waving a bundle of herbs in the air, presumably to ward off bad luck or bad smells, whichever leaves first. And you, standing front and centre, feel every eye settle on you. You can't tell which is worse, the eager anticipation, the silent judgment, or the distant laughter when someone slips on a patch of mud. You focus on the work, checking the rope, double-checking the knots, trying not to trip on your own feet. Stage fright isn't a thing in the Middle Ages, it's just called Tuesday. If you make a mistake, if the axe sticks or the rope doesn't cooperate, You know the entire town will be talking about it for weeks. Your reputation is built or broken in real time, and the crowd never forgets. Remember last year, they'll say? He needed 3 swings. 3? Your nightmares write themselves. When it's over, the crowd disperses, chatting animatedly as if they've just seen a play, not a person's last moments. The sausage vendors pack up, the children chase each other, and the mayor makes a note to review procedures, which means blame you quietly over supper. You're left alone on the scaffold, sweeping sawdust and wondering if next week will be any easier. Spoiler, it won't. Medieval crowd control. Not so much about keeping order as it is about surviving the scrutiny. In this town, the only thing that moves faster than gossip is the line for fresh bread. You may be the star, but nobody's lining up for your autograph. Just another day at the world's least enviable job. You're part-time executioner, part-time therapist. You stand awkwardly nearby as the priest tries to save the soul of the soon-to-be former citizen. Do you make eye contact? Do you offer a last drink? Nobody trains you for this. If there's one thing medieval job descriptions never mention, it's unexpected emotional support. But here you are, shuffling your feet on the scaffold, while a condemned villager mumbles their last regrets to a priest. The priest's voice is low, urgent, and you try to look busy, checking the rope, straightening your apron, pretending you're not actually hearing every whispered secret and panicked prayer. Sometimes the condemned weep, sometimes they rage, sometimes they try to bargain. Surely if I apologise for stealing that goose, can we just call it a learning experience? But it's too late for negotiations. Still, you nod sympathetically. It's a weird, unspoken bond. You're the last human face they see, and the first person they curse in the afterlife. You're never sure where to stand. Too close, and it looks like you're eavesdropping on their private moment with God. Too far, and you might miss the signal from the priest when it's time to get to work. So you hover, anxious, half in the shadows, half in the sunlight, parting your hands as if you're about to offer advice. Spoiler, you don't have any. The priest, of course, is a pro at this. He has the soothing voice, the practiced prayers, the reassuring hand on the shoulder. You, meanwhile, have a face that says, "Sorry about this," and a toolkit that isn't exactly comforting. Sometimes you try to offer something, a sip of ale, a crust of bread, a quick prayer of your own. May the axe be sharp, may the rope be quick, but it always feels a little inadequate. Occasionally the condemned want to talk to you. They ask what it will feel like, if it will hurt, if you've done this before. You have, but you never admit how many times. Sometimes they apologise for crimes they didn't commit just to fill the silence. Other times they insult you or curse your children to 3 generations of warts. You nod along. You've heard it all. Medieval venting. It's not great for your ego, but it passes the time. There's a special awkwardness when the crowd is silent. The birds have stopped chirping, and all you hear is a confession about long ago sins and the world's most elaborate recipe for cabbage stew. Sometimes the condemned try humour, and you're obligated to muster a polite smile, even if it's the worst joke you've ever heard. Guess I really lost my head this time, eh? Classic. The most uncomfortable moment. When the priest asks if the condemned has any last wishes and they turn to you, as if you're some kind of medieval genie with the power to grant requests. Sorry, the only thing you can offer is a quick job and maybe a little extra sawdust. Sometimes the wish is simple. Tell my wife I love her. Other times it's, make sure the axe is sharp. You do your best. Sometimes you can't, but you do try. Nobody trains you for this. You got a lesson in tying knots, a demonstration in blade sharpening, but zero preparation for handling tears, confessions, or existential crises. There's no manual for how to hold yourself while a person confronts eternity, or for how to react when they suddenly tell you their life story, right there in front of half the town. And so, every execution day you stand at the edge of these final, awkward conversations. You try to look professional. You try to look human. You hope the priest finishes quickly, that the condemned finds peace, and that, if nothing else, you both get through this moment with some shred of dignity intact. You may be the last face they see, but you're also the last to hear their story. Awkward, heartfelt, or just plain bizarre. It's a burden you never asked for, and one you'll never really forget. The scaffold creaks, the crowd murmurs, and you're suddenly very aware of your own heartbeat. There are no do-overs. You can't exactly Control+Z an execution. Butterflies? Try pterodactyls. The medieval square is packed, and every face seems to be watching you with a mixture of hope, dread, and, if you're honest, a little boredom. For most of the crowd, this is the most excitement they'll see all month. For you, it's a tightrope walk where one stumble means infamy, not just embarrassment. If you're lucky, they'll only talk about it for a year. If you're not, they'll nickname you Three-Swing Tom and sing songs about you at the tavern. You grip the axe or sword, your hands slightly slick, not from blood but from nerves. The handle is worn, familiar, and heavier than it felt back in your cottage. Someone in the audience coughs. A dog barks. You realise you can hear your own breathing, loud and ragged, as if your lungs have forgotten the rhythm of being alive. You step to your mark on the platform, feeling the plank shift beneath your feet. The condemned stands, pale and trembling, and you suddenly wish you could trade places. At least then you wouldn't be the one everyone is judging for a technique. Every eye is locked on you. The priest glances over, ready to signal. A noble adjusts his hat. Somewhere a child whispers, "Will he miss?" Fantastic. Nothing like a little morale boost from the peanut gallery. There's no script for this performance, just years of whispered advice and the memory of other executioners, some who managed to make it look easy, and some who very much did not. Your pulse thuds in your ears. You remember all the horror stories, the time the rope broke, the time the axe slipped, the time someone fainted before the job even started. You don't want to be that story. You want this over, clean and quiet, with as little spectacle as possible. So, naturally, you're terrified. You try to focus on the mechanics. You check your grip. You steady your stance. You mentally recite the steps. Raise, aim, swing. It's simple, on paper. In reality, your muscles tense and your mind races with what-ifs. What if the condemned moves? What if the crowd gets restless? What if your tool, so carefully sharpened that morning, betrays you with a bounce or a slip? There are no rehearsals, no practice runs, just one chance and the knowledge that you'll never live it down if you get it wrong. The pressure mounts in a way that feels physical. Sweat beads on your brow, mixing with the dust and the stray sense of fear, livestock, and cooking sausages drifting from the vendor at the edge of the crowd. Is someone actually eating right now? Yes. Yes, they are. Medieval audiences are nothing if not practical. The sheriff gives you a look, a mix of sympathy and "don't mess this up please for both our sakes." The condemned takes a shaky breath. The priest finishes his prayer. You realise your heart is beating so loud it could be mistaken for the town drum. And then, just as the murmurs peak, the square falls into an eerie hush. This is your cue. You swing, hoping for the best, fearing the worst. Time stretches, the world narrows, and all that exists is the moment. Muscle, wood, steel, and the eyes of an entire village burning holes in your back. And just like that, it's done. The moment passes. The crowd exhales, some with relief, others with disappointment. The tension breaks. Sometimes with applause, sometimes with silence, sometimes with the offhanded critique of a local drunk who thinks he could have done it better. You step away, your heart still pounding, your legs wobbly, knowing that next time the stage fright will be waiting again. Stage fright, medieval edition, is not just nerves, it's the weight of justice, spectacle, and a job you never wanted, performed in front of the world's least forgiving audience. And unlike in the modern world, nobody offers you flowers after the show. If you're lucky, you get to keep your breakfast down. If you're not, well, there's always next time. Not every job goes smoothly. Sometimes the axe bounces. Sometimes the rope snaps. Sometimes the crowd gasps and you wish you could melt through the floor. Medieval Yelp reviews are brutal. Picture this. You've spent all morning prepping your tools, steadying your nerves and telling yourself, this time it'll be quick, it'll be clean. Then, just as you swing, fate intervenes. Maybe the condemned twitches. Maybe the handles slick with sweat or yesterday's rain. Or maybe the woodworm you pretended not to see has finally declared its independence. Either way, instead of a decisive, merciful finish, your axe clunks, glances off or gets stuck halfway through its job. There's a sound, a wet, ugly thunk followed by an even uglier silence. Then comes the gasp. There's nothing quite like the gasp of a medieval crowd witnessing a mistake. It ripples outward. Front row grimaces, the back rows crane their necks, children drop their sausages, and someone in the third row mutters, I told you he should have sharpened it more. Thanks for the feedback, Harold. Where were you at 6 a.m. with your fancy whetstone? You're standing there, axe in hand, with the eyes of every villager, noble and itinerant dog on you. The condemned is probably cursing, the priest is muttering an emergency prayer, and you're contemplating whether you could just jump off the scaffold and run for the woods. You can't. The crowd blocks every exit, eager to see what happens next. Will you try again? Do you have the guts? Or is this the day you get a nickname that sticks for a decade? It gets worse. Sometimes it's the rope. There you are, checking knots, double-checking for frays, doing your best to avoid the incident from last year. And still, right as the town clock strikes and the crowd holds its breath, the rope gives way with a tragic twang. Instead of swift justice, you've delivered a slapstick farce. The condemned lands awkwardly, dazed but alive, and now it's your job to either fix the rope, fix your reputation, or, if you're very unlucky, fix both at once while the crowd boos like disappointed sports fans. Medieval audiences are not forgiving. Unlike today, there's no anonymous online review. Critiques happen in real time and are shouted for all to hear. He's lost his touch. Bring back old Henry. At least he knew how to aim. My cousin could do better with a wooden spoon. Some people claim you're cursed, others that you're drunk. Someone in the crowd invents a joke on the spot, and suddenly, for the rest of the year, children call you Twice-Swing Toby or Nooseless Ned. The shame lingers. In a village where everyone knows everyone, botched executions become the stuff of legend. People recount the details over dinner, embellishing each time until you're a clumsy villain in every story. If you're lucky, the mayor might defend you. He's doing his best. But even he will start avoiding your gaze in the bakery. Worse, you have to face the condemned's family. There's no polite way to say, sorry about the mess, but medieval tools aren't exactly reliable. Sometimes you try to apologise. Sometimes you just hope the family avoids you forever. You don't sleep well that night, or the next. And yet, tomorrow, you'll be back on the scaffold, sharpening your tools, checking your knots, trying desperately to redeem yourself. Because in the end, being a medieval executioner isn't about perfection. It's about surviving long enough that someone else makes a bigger mistake. So you steady yourself, face the jeers, and hope for the mercy of a clean swing next time. Because in the Middle Ages, everyone remembers your failures, and they'll remind you of them every chance they get. Congratulations, you've done the deed. Now what? You, or someone even lower on the medieval pecking order, has to clean up. Heads, blood, sometimes bits you'd rather not identify. No one sticks around to help. The crowd, having gorged themselves on drama and sausage, drifts away to the tavern, already embellishing the day's story. The nobles turn up their noses, the priest mutters a final prayer, and even the sheriff gives you a sympathetic look before retreating to file paperwork, which in medieval times is just talking loudly in the next room. You're left standing on the scaffold, staring down at a scene no one ever wants to describe. It's a little like closing time at the world's worst butcher shop. Let's talk logistics. Medieval justice isn't known for its efficiency, and nobody gives you a mop and bucket with your axe. The clean-up kit, a few sacks of sawdust, a battered broom, and a strong stomach. You sprinkle sawdust to soak up the worst of it, sweeping the rest into the gutter or, If you're in a fancy town, down a specially built hole. Heads are bagged, bodies are carted off, sometimes by you, sometimes by a volunteer recruited through the time-honoured tradition of bribery or thinly veiled threats. If you're lucky, the condemned had friends or family willing to claim the remains. If not, it's up to you to haul everything to the edge of town, or in some places to a patch of consecrated ground reserved for the unpopular. No one ever talks about the details. The blood doesn't just sit on the wood, it seeps into every crack and knot congealing in the sun, until the scaffold smells like regret for days. You try to scrub it out with water, but mostly you just make a thin soup that runs down your boots and into the street. The stains never quite leave. In fact, some towns are proud of their dark patches, pointing them out to visitors like haunted trophies. That's where they hanged old Greg, and over there's where the rope broke on Agnes the pickpocket, shame about her shoes. Then there are the bits. Executions aren't as tidy as history books suggest. Sometimes the job leaves a mess. Hair, teeth, scraps of cloth, the occasional unidentifiable blob that you're better off ignoring. You pick everything up with a stick or your least favourite handkerchief, hoping no one is watching. Spoiler. Someone always is, and they'll tell everyone at the market by noon. There's a certain medieval etiquette to this too. You're supposed to be brisk but respectful. Don't toss the head like a cabbage. Place it gently in the basket, nod solemnly, and try to ignore the dogs sniffing around for leftovers. If you're feeling generous, you might cover the remains with a shroud, if one was provided, which it usually isn't. When the scaffold is finally clear, you do one last sweep, collecting the sawdust, tucking away your tools and giving the wood a quick rinse. With any luck, it won't rain for a while. Wet blood has a way of becoming permanent medieval art. The townsfolk avoid the square for a day or two, but eventually the market returns. Someone sets up a cabbage stall over the very spot and the world spins on. History glosses over the fact that someone, you, spent an hour scrubbing the square so the town could buy onions without slipping. By the time you're done, your apron is heavier, your boots are a lost cause, and your appetite has vanished. You trudge home in silence, thinking about how nobody ever includes this part in the songs. There are no ballads about the guy with the broom and the haunted look in his eye, but that's the job. Medieval justice is messy, and the aftermath is lonelier than any scaffold. Tomorrow the square will be clean, the crowd will forget, and you'll be just another shadow, blending into the background until justice calls again. For a job that ruins your social life and stains your soul, you'd think the pay would be good. Spoiler, it's barely enough for rent and a new axe. Forget about retirement plans. When you signed up, okay, volunteered by force of family curse or civic guilt, nobody handed you a salary sheet. There's no medieval HR to explain your benefits package, mostly because there aren't any. Your compensation comes as a handful of tarnished coins, sometimes a chicken, and if you're lucky, a mug of ale delivered by someone who doesn't spit in it first. Payment is as reliable as the local rope maker, which is to say, not at all. Let's break it down. You're technically a public servant, so your wages come from the town's taxes. These taxes are collected by the Lord Scribe, who may or may not remember to write your name on the list. Sometimes your payment is delayed because the scribe couldn't find you. A likely story, considering your house is the only one on the edge of town surrounded by a suspiciously large number of crows. If you're lucky, your wage is enough to buy a new shirt twice a year. If you're unlucky, you're paid in IOUs and stale bread. Occasionally, a noble will toss you a few extra coins after a particularly complicated job, but don't get excited. This is less a bonus and more a bribe for your silence. You pocket the money and try not to wonder what you're supposed to forget. The rest of your perks are mostly theoretical. You're allowed to live, for instance, which in medieval Europe is not something to be taken for granted. Some towns try to sweeten the deal by giving you free lodging, which means a damp hut next to the town wall, conveniently close to both the gallows and the communal trash heap. The rent is cheap because nobody else wants to live there, and your only neighbours are a family of aggressive geese. Utilities, firewood if you can find it, and water that probably won't kill you if you boil it first. Every now and then, you receive what's called a privilege. This could be first dibs on leftover bread at the market, or maybe the right to keep a certain amount of the condemned's clothing, assuming anyone wants a pair of blood-stained hose or shoes with only one good sole. The most famous perk is the right to claim the rope after a hanging. Superstitious villagers actually pay for this, believing it brings luck. Irony is the real winner here. Of course, there are deductions. You pay for your own tools, axes, sharpening stones, rope, extra sawdust for clean-up. Break an axe? That's coming out of your pocket. Need new boots? Hope you're good at bartering. The town rarely reimburses you for work expenses, unless you count a sympathetic shrug from the sheriff. There's no paid vacation, sick leave, or mental health day. If you're too ill to work, justice gets delayed, or someone less qualified gets pressed into service, which only makes your next job harder. As for retirement, there's no plan. You work until you're too old, too injured, or too unpopular to be allowed near sharp objects. At that point, the town quietly forgets you exist, and you fade into legend, or just into the background, living off savings that barely cover turnips. Most nights, you count your coins and wonder if it's worth it. The money's never enough to buy respect. People pay you because they have to, not because they want to, and at the end of the month, as you patch your apron and sharpen your axe, you realise being a medieval executioner means working the world's most thankless job for the world's smallest paycheck. So you pocket your meagre earnings, dodge the baker's glare, and remind yourself that at least you're getting paid, unlike the last guy who crossed the Lord. That's one retirement plan you definitely want to avoid. So how's your social calendar? The baker won't shake your hand, the innkeeper forgets your order. You have a reserved seat at church, way in the back, next to the draft. It's a strange thing, being the most talked about person in town, but never the one people talk to. In theory, you're part of the community. You live here after all, paying what passes for rent, picking up your bread and occasional discounted cabbage, dodging chickens in the muddy street. But in practice, you exist in a sort of social quarantine. Medieval small talk is already a challenge, but it's even trickier when your job is public relations for death. You walk into the market and conversations drop off like a drawbridge. The friendly gossip about the weather or whose goat wandered into whose cottage instantly shifts to a hush. Children are shooed behind skirts, as if your mere presence will turn them into criminal masterminds, or worse, future executioners. You try a polite nod, but it's returned with a nervous half-smile, the universal sign for, please keep your distance and also don't make me next. Let's talk about friends, or rather the absence of them. Sure, you had friends once before you picked up the axe. Some brave souls might attempt to chat after a few ales, but it's always stilted, and the conversation never quite lands on what you actually do. Topics include the weather, the price of turnips, or how much everyone hates the new taxes. Never, so how was work today? If you're really lucky, the local blacksmith will let you drink at the end of the bar in silence, both of you bonding over mutual calluses and a shared sense of being misunderstood. At the inn, you can wait a long time for your mug of ale. It's not that the innkeeper dislikes your money. He just prefers to serve you with a long-handled ladle, from a safe distance, preferably while reciting a prayer under his breath. Regulars give up their seats when you walk in, not out of respect, but because everyone's a little superstitious. You're a living, breathing reminder that life is short and sometimes ends very publicly. And romance? Good luck. Medieval dating was never easy. Scented candles hadn't been invented, and everyone's teeth looked like a handful of gravel. But it's especially tough for the local executioner. You're not exactly first pick at the harvest dance. Courting someone means first convincing their parents that you're not cursed, haunted, or in league with questionable supernatural forces. Most families would rather their daughter married a wandering juggler. At least jugglers only drop things, not people. Even your neighbours keep their distance. The house next to yours has been for rent since the last 3 tenants moved out. Nobody borrows a cup of flour from the executioner, and if someone does knock on your door, it's usually to complain about the noise, not to invite you to a feast. Community events. You're on the guest list in theory, but your name always gets lost at the bottom, along with maybe invite the rats. Church is no better. While everyone else squeezes into the warm pews, you get a solitary bench in the back, so far from the altar that you're practically outside. It's draughty, cold, and you spend the sermon contemplating whether your cough is divine punishment or just a side effect of medieval insulation. The priest will pray for your soul, but he'll never invite you for supper. Yet, somehow, you persist, you nod, you smile, you keep showing up, because even in the silence, even in the awkward pauses and nervous glances, you're still part of this village. You're the thread nobody wants to touch, but the one that holds the tapestry together, awkwardly, quietly, and always a little bit apart. Welcome to your social life. Cold, draughty, but somehow stubbornly resilient. Your family gets the fun side effects of your profession, rumours, cold shoulders, and the occasional dead animal left on your doorstep. Making friends at school? Not happening. Let's be honest. Being the medieval executioner is lonely, but being related to one is a masterclass in unwanted attention. The village has long memories, and if you swing the axe, your children will carry the burden long after you hang up your apron. School isn't a sanctuary, it's more like a rumour mill with extra mud. When roll call comes around, your kid's name gets whispered, not spoken, as if even syllables might catch something. Rumours are relentless. Some say you boil bones in the backyard, others whisper that your family talks to ghosts. One particularly creative neighbour claims your garden only grows nightshade and wolfsbane. The truth? You're just trying to grow a few onions that aren't shaped like potatoes. Still, superstition is stubborn. The kids on your street dare each other to run past your house at dusk, convinced they'll be hexed with bad luck or, worse, bad hair. Inside the house, your family adapts. Your partner learns to keep to themselves at the market, head down, money ready, no eye contact. The fishmonger slips them the last pick of the day for the executioner's family. And it's never the freshest catch. When you host meals, guests are rare. The local priest declines every invitation, and the neighbours only stop by if they need to return a lost chicken, or inform you, nervously, that someone has once again thrown turnips at your door. Your kids become experts at playing by themselves. They invent games with rules like don't step on the cracks or you'll be shunned, and hide and seek, but you can never be found. Birthday parties are quiet affairs. Instead of a crowd, you have a lopsided cake, a candle salvage from the last church festival, and a hopeful wish that next year things might be different. Spoiler, they won't be, but hope is cheap and nobody can tax it. At home, you try to make up for what society takes away. Story time by the fire is a ritual, a place where you can spin tales that don't end with a swinging rope. Your children listen with wide eyes, learning lessons about kindness, resilience, and how to ignore people who think they're cursed. Sometimes your partner laughs and says, "At least we always get a seat at the festival. Nobody else wants to sit near us." Silver linings, medieval style. But the stigma lingers. If your daughter brings home a friend, you brace yourself for that child's parents to arrive, faces pale, offering awkward excuses about chores left unfinished or goats that suddenly need tending. Friendships are fleeting, and every relationship comes with a countdown timer. Every so often the door will rattle late at night, and you'll find a gift, or a threat, on the step. Sometimes it's a basket of apples, sometimes a dead rat. The message is the same. You're needed, but not welcome. You teach your children how to rise above it, to walk through town with heads high, to understand that fear often wears the mask of cruelty. Despite all this, family life goes on. You share meals, patch clothes, laugh at jokes nobody else would find funny. In a strange way, the isolation makes your bond stronger. You become each other's safe haven, a small circle against a world that prefers to keep you on the fringe. There's comfort in the shared struggle, a resilience that grows with every cold shoulder and every sideways glance. Because in the end, your home is where the awkward silences end, where rumours fade, and where, for a little while, you're not the executioner's family. You're just family. And in medieval times, that's the closest thing to peace anyone gets. Need to buy bread? Hope you like being last in line. Some vendors shortchange you, others cross themselves. The fishmonger? He's the only one who'll talk, but that's just because his fish stink more than your apron. In the medieval village, market day is a social event. A blur of chatter, livestock drama and bargaining. For everyone else, that is. For you, it's more like a slow parade through a minefield of suspicion and side-eye. You wake up early, planning your approach with military precision. Maybe, just maybe, if you go before sunrise, you'll avoid the crowds. No such luck. Someone always spots you, and word travels faster than the smell from the cheese stall. The moment you step into the square, conversation's quiet. You can hear the baker's whisper from 20 paces. That's him. That's the one who... He never finishes the sentence. You don't have to. The villagers already know the punchline. The bread queue is its own circle of hell. You wait, shifting from foot to foot, while everyone else seems to have twice as many questions about today's flour blend. One customer recites her entire family tree just to stall. When it's finally your turn, the baker hands you the toughest loaf in the pile with a look that says, "Good luck, and try not to haunt me." You check your change and, surprise, it's always a coin short. Next, you try the vegetable stall. The vendor glances at your apron, bites his lip, and offers you a selection that's mostly turnip tops and sad carrots. "That's all that's left," he shrugs. Funny how there were perfectly good onions 2 customers ago. You buy them anyway. Beggars can't be choosers, especially if their job involves swinging an axe for a living. Other villagers are subtler. Some cross themselves as you pass, others just drift a little further down the line, as if avoiding the draft you carry with you. Children are torn between curiosity and terror. Most hide behind their parents, but a few daring souls try to peek at your shopping basket, probably hoping for something more exciting than wilted kale. Then there's the fishmonger, who greets you with a crooked grin and a slab of something suspiciously grey. "Good day for eels," he says every time. You're not sure what day isn't a good day for eels in his world, but you take it with a smile. He'll actually chat, swap in village gossip with you as if you're not the local outcast, but the price is listening to 5 minutes about the relative merits of herring versus pike. It's the closest thing you have to small talk. You try to keep your head down and make your errands quick, but people watch you anyway. It's as if buying cabbages is a public spectacle. Every awkward moment is magnified. A dropped coin, a torn sack, a sneeze at the spice stall. Each one gives someone new material for tonight's supper conversation. Even paying is an ordeal. No one wants to touch your hand. Change is dropped on the counter, or, if you're lucky, wrapped in a rag. You get the feeling that if anyone had a tongs handy, they'd use it just for you. At least you don't have to worry about anyone stealing your shopping. No one dares go near your basket, not even the stray dogs. When your errands are finally over, you trudge home with your lumpy bread, bruised carrots, and suspicious eels. You wonder if anyone else notices how quiet the market becomes when you leave. A collective sigh of relief, like the festival is finally over. But this is just life for a medieval executioner. You keep shopping week after week, accepting the glares and the cold shoulders with a resigned nod. In the end, you still get to eat, even if the food is a little tougher and the company a little colder. And as you bite into your brick-like bread at home, you can't help but think. At least the fishmonger never judges. He just talks, and talks, and talks. When night falls, the village sleeps, except for you. You lie awake, replaying the day's work, hoping the local ghosts take the night off. Medieval mattresses aren't great, but they're worse when you're haunted. The world outside your window is quiet. The only sounds are distant dogs barking, the creak of settling wood, and the occasional owl reminding you that some creatures thrive in darkness. You, unfortunately, are not one of them. You stare at the low ceiling, hands folded on your chest, listening to your heart thump with a mix of exhaustion and regret. Each shadow in the corner is a memory. Each groan from the wind sounds a little like a moan from the scaffold. You try to shake it off, but sleep comes in fits and starts, when it comes at all. The medieval mattress doesn't help. You lie on what's basically a sack stuffed with straw and lumpy mystery, and every time you turn over something pokes you. Sometimes it's a bit of hay, sometimes it's a pebble. Once you're fairly sure it was a tooth, don't ask whose. The mattress is supposed to offer rest, but instead it's a nightly exercise in guess that discomfort. You long for peace, but even when your body finally settles, your mind keeps circling the day's events like a moth to candlelight. Every face, every name, every moment on the scaffold replays in your head. You wonder about the condemned. Were they truly guilty? Did you do your job well, or was your swing too slow, your rope too tight? You remember their final words, their trembling hands, their desperate eyes searching for forgiveness from someone. Anyone. The priest says it's not your burden to carry, but priests sleep soundly. Executioners don't get that luxury. And then there are the nightmares. Your dreams are crowded with shadows and echoes. Sometimes you're the one on the scaffold. Sometimes you're swinging and swinging, but nothing ever ends. Just an endless parade of accusing faces and disappointed ghosts. You wake up in a cold sweat, sheets twisted, convinced that if you close your eyes again, you'll see them all standing at the foot of your bed, waiting for answers you can't give. You try to distract yourself. Some nights you count the cracks in the ceiling or recite every saint you can remember, hoping one of them has a soft spot for insomniac executioners. Other nights you talk quietly to the darkness, confessing secrets that even the priest never hears. It doesn't help. The village may sleep, but your conscience paces the floor, restless and uninvited. Sometimes you get up, pad across the cold floor and stand at the window, watching the empty square where it all happened. The scaffold is a dark silhouette under the moonlight. Just wood and rope now, but to you it's a stage where guilt never quite leaves. You see yourself out there, alone, trying to do a job nobody wants and everybody judges. You wonder if anyone else dreams about you, or if you're the only one haunted by your own hands. In the morning you'll pull on your apron and face the world like nothing's wrong. You'll buy bread, nod politely, and hope nobody sees how tired you look. But tonight, you wrestle with ghosts and guilt, caught in a job that stains your soul as much as it stains your sleeves. If you're lucky, sleep comes at last, slow and heavy without dreams. If not, you count the hours until sunrise, waiting for the village to wake up and drown out your memories with the noise of another day. That's the thing about being the executioner. Your nightmares are just part of the uniform, and in medieval times nobody invents a pillow soft enough to silence a conscience. There are a few dubious perks. Sometimes a grateful noble will send ale, or you'll get first dibs on unclaimed bread at the bakery. Mostly it's just leftovers. Sometimes you get a chicken. No one wants to know where it came from. Let's be honest, when people imagine the benefits package for a medieval executioner, they picture extra coins, a special room at the inn, or a secret handshake with the mayor. The truth? Your perks are as suspicious as your reputation. Occasionally a local lord, eager to show his appreciation, mostly for not botching the latest high-profile hanging, sends a small barrel of ale to your doorstep. If you're lucky, it arrives unpoisoned and still mostly full. If you're really lucky, it's strong enough to help you sleep through your nightmares. Sometimes there's a little something from the bakery. Yesterday's bread, a bit chewier than usual but still technically edible. The baker hands it over with a forced smile and a muttered, "Thanks for your service." It's not a baguette, it's not warm, and you suspect it's only yours because nobody else was willing to risk their teeth. Still, in a world where hunger is a daily companion, a loaf is a loaf. Rumour has it you get first pick at the market. In reality, this means you get to take whatever the villagers quietly set aside. Slightly wilted greens, apples with one too many bruises, cheese that's just crossed the threshold from aged to alive. Sometimes you receive eggs, one or two, sometimes a whole clutch. Sometimes you get a chicken. Nobody says a word, but you can always tell from the way the feathers look that it wasn't the best-loved bird in the coop. There are a few special privileges for your line of work, depending on the region. In some towns, you're allowed to keep the clothes of the condemned. Sounds great until you realise those clothes are often torn, stained, and thoroughly out of fashion, if they ever were in style to begin with. Once in a blue moon, you find a hidden coin in a pocket or a piece of jewellery someone forgot to mention. It's not exactly buried treasure, but you take your wins where you can get them. One of the stranger traditions is the rope. Yes, the rope. After a hanging, you have the legal right to cut off a piece and sell it to anyone foolish enough to believe it brings luck. You'd be amazed what people will pay for a piece of rope with a dubious history. Superstition is stronger than soap in medieval Europe. Some weeks, rope is the only thing paying the bills. Then there are the social perks. Sometimes the local tavern will pour you a free mug of something potent, if only to hear you tell stories about your job. What's the weirdest last request you've heard? How sharp is your axe, really? The drink is free, the company's nervous, and everyone is careful not to touch your cup after you leave. If you're really lucky, a grateful family, grateful for a job done quickly and mercifully, might send over a pie or a jug of honey. It's rare, but it happens. You eat it slowly, savouring every bite, because these are the few moments when you remember you're part of the human community, not just its grim caretaker. Of course, most of your perks are just leftovers, cast-offs, and things nobody else wanted. But in the medieval world, even the smallest comfort is worth something. You take what you can get: a cold ale, a lumpy loaf, a chicken with an attitude problem. Perks, medieval style. Not glamorous, but a little extra now and then to soften the edge of the hardest job in town. Washing up after work is tricky. Blood doesn't come out easily, especially when you only get a bath every other Saturday. Soap, if you can afford it. Otherwise it's embrace the stink. Imagine coming home after a long day swinging axes and tying knots, hands sticky, apron stiff, and the vague suspicion that something behind your ear isn't actually yours. You step inside, greeted by your family and an unmistakable cloud of eau d'execuzione, part metallic, part damp wool, and part what died in the river this week. Even the family dog hesitates to give you a sniff. The real struggle begins at the wash basin. Medieval running water means a bucket you have to fill yourself, usually from a stream that everyone upstream has already used for their laundry, their livestock, and sometimes their less savoury secrets. You take a handful, splash your face, and watch the water immediately turn pink. You scrub with a rag, attacking the stains with the desperate optimism of someone who's never succeeded at this before. Soap is an elusive luxury, crafted from animal fat and lye and sold by women with suspiciously clean hands. If you're flush with coin, maybe the mayor actually paid you this week, you can buy a small gritty bar that burns almost as much as it cleans. You use it sparingly, first on your hands, then on your arms, and maybe, just maybe, on your face if you're feeling reckless. The rest of your body gets the medieval rinse, a splash of cold water, a vigorous rub, and a whispered hope that nobody's standing too close tomorrow. When bath day finally comes, every other Saturday, unless you're feeling truly offensive or the wind is blowing your way, you haul out the family's wooden tub. It's round, leaky, and more splinters than barrel, but it's the closest thing to a spa you'll ever see. Heating water is a luxury, so you settle for lukewarm at best, and try not to think about the last person who used it. Baths are communal, and in a family of 5 you're lucky if you're second in line. Usually you're last. Nobody's fighting for the privilege of swimming in the executioner's runoff. You scrub at your apron, beating it against a rock by the river, while the washerwomen nearby gossip and edge a little further away. Blood never really comes out. Some stains fade, but most set in for good, adding to the tapestry of past jobs. You try to convince yourself that each dark patch is just a little extra leather dye. Nobody's fooled. Hair is another adventure. Medieval shampoo is a dream for future centuries. You use cold water and maybe a splash of vinegar if you can steal it from the kitchen without being caught. You run your fingers through tangles, picking out bits of hay, and once, something you sincerely hope was a twig. Nails are a battleground. You scrub under them, but there's always a stubborn line of something that refuses to budge. You try not to think about it. You just keep them short and hope that's good enough. Clothes are no easier. Laundry is done by hand in cold water with lye, then left to dry on a line no one else will use. You rotate between 2 tunics and 1 apron, both of which have seen things that would frighten even the bravest noble. At the end of all this, you do feel a bit cleaner, at least for a few hours until the next day's work begins. Hygiene for the medieval executioner isn't about smelling nice. It's about managing the unavoidable, blood, sweat, and the reality that no matter how hard you scrub, some stains, literal and otherwise, are just part of the job. And so, you embrace the stink. At least the fishmonger never complains. Not every execution goes smoothly with the audience. Sometimes the mob turns angry, the weather turns bad, or someone's cousin gets bold. Suddenly you're dodging tomatoes, or worse. For most jobs, bad day at the office means spilling ink on your best shirt or missing lunch. For you, it means an angry mob, a sky-threatening biblical floods, and the sudden realization that everyone in town brought something throwable. The medieval crowd is a fickle beast, hungry for justice 1 minute, howling for your head the next. It all starts innocently enough. The villagers gather, jostling for a view, trading bets on how quickly you'll finish the job, but then the wind shifts. Maybe the condemned is popular, or maybe someone's brother-in-law has too much to drink and starts a chant. Sometimes it's as simple as the wrong noble making the wrong decision, and suddenly all eyes are on you. The energy thickens. It only takes a spark, an offhand insult, a bad swing, or a particularly enthusiastic chicken in the crowd, and things go south. The classic hazard, projectiles. Tomatoes are the cliché, but the reality is much more creative. On a bad day, you'll get pelted with whatever's at hand. Turnips, rotten eggs, maybe a rock wrapped in someone's old sock. Once you're pretty sure you got hit with a stale loaf that left a bruise. These moments are never featured in the job description. You develop the reflexes of a seasoned juggler, dodging incoming vegetables while still trying to look authoritative on a wobbling scaffold. Then there's the weather. Rain turns the square into a slippery soup. Mud flies everywhere and the rope sags. The crowd gets restless in the cold, shivering and impatient, quick to anger if you delay. In summer, tempers flare in the heat. Sweat, smells, and short fuses everywhere. Lightning once struck the gallows post just before an execution, which everyone agreed was either a sign from God or just Tuesday in your cursed corner of Europe. But the real danger is the mob's mood. Sometimes the condemned's family is large and loud. You spot familiar faces, maybe someone you bought cheese from yesterday, shouting and waving their fists. The sheriff tries to maintain order, but he's mostly there for decoration. If the mob pushes forward, you're on your own. There's no escape route. The scaffold's a stage, and you're cornered with nothing but an axe and a sinking feeling that you should have been a baker. There's also the risk of mistaken identity. Maybe the crowd's angry about taxes or famine or that new curfew, and you're the only representative of official business on hand. You try to shrink into your apron, but it's hard to be invisible when you're holding the biggest axe in town. You put on your most professional expression, hoping to project, just doing my job, but the mob isn't always interested in nuance. Sometimes the priest steps in, waving his arms and calling for calm, but even his holy authority has limits, especially when someone lobs a potato his way, and he ducks with the speed of a seasoned survivor. In the worst cases, you're forced to retreat, shielded by a handful of guards and a prayer that nobody slips on the mud and gives the crowd a new target. Afterward, you dust yourself off, literally and figuratively, and limp home, picking cabbage leaves out of your hair. The story spreads through the village. Did you see how he dodged that turnip? Remarkable reflexes. Shame about the shoes. It becomes just another tale added to your legend, another reason for people to cross the street when they see you coming. But that's part of the job hazard. Sometimes it's not just the condemned who's at risk. In medieval life, everyone's one bad day away from the wrong side of the crowd, and for the executioner, every public job is just a tomato away from disaster. Some towns give you a mask, some just hope you keep your hood up. Either way, anonymity is supposed to protect you. It mostly just makes you sweat buckets and look suspicious. Masks are a funny thing in the medieval world. They're meant to hide your face, to blur your identity so you can blend back into the crowd after the dirty work is done. In practice, it's the medieval equivalent of a celebrity wearing sunglasses in a tiny village. Everyone still knows exactly who you are, but now you just look like you're trying too hard. The only difference is, instead of being mobbed for autographs, you're avoided at the bread stall like you have the plague, possibly because the mask makes you look a little bit like you do. On execution day, the ritual is always the same. You fumble with the mask, a heavy thing made of leather, or if your town's really investing in image, maybe some iron with little eye slits and a mouth hole that turns your voice into a wheeze. You tie it on, feeling the rough edges scratch at your jaw. Instantly your vision narrows, your breath gets humid, and the world takes on that faint aroma of last week's stew. Sweat collects at your temples before you've even picked up your axe. The idea, of course, is that if people can't see your face, they can't take revenge later. The condemned won't recognize you, the family can't send curses your way, and your neighbours can plausibly pretend they don't know who swings the blade. In theory, it's a clever bit of social camouflage. In reality, your walk, your height, your voice, and the fact that you live alone in the house by the gallows pretty much give the game away. Masks don't just hide your face, they hide your humanity. People see the hood, the mask, and all they think is, the executioner. You could be anyone, or no one at all. Sometimes you're grateful for the distance. It's easier to stare down a crowd if they can't see your fear. Other times, it's just another layer between you and the world, a barrier that's hard to take off even when you get home. In towns without masks, you're expected to do the job with a hood pulled low or a scarf wrapped around your face. It does little for privacy and even less for comfort. On a hot day, it's an oven. On a cold day, it's a wind tunnel. If it rains, the mask gets soggy and clings in all the wrong places. If you sneeze, it's a crisis. Your voice emerges muffled and odd, as if you're narrating your own nightmares from the bottom of a well. Sometimes wearing the mask gives you a weird sense of power. People look away, children hide, even the priest looks nervous when you speak. You start to wonder if anonymity is really about protecting you, or about making you into something less than human, a walking symbol rather than a person with sore feet and laundry to do. Of course, there are drawbacks. The mask gets hot. Your vision is never quite clear. You trip over uneven boards or miss the signal from the sheriff. You can't wipe the sweat from your brow without risking the whole thing sliding sideways, and the itch. No one tells you about the itch. Imagine trying to look dignified while the inside of your nose is staging a rebellion. The worst part? Everyone still knows. The fishmonger winks when you pass, the kids whisper, and the baker just happens to always have your favourite loaf ready at the very back for someone special. Anonymity, medieval style, a mask, a hood, and a secret everyone already shares. At the end of the day, you hang the mask on its peg, wipe your brow, and remind yourself that you're still you under the leather and legend. The mask may hide your face, but it can't hide your job, or the smell of sweat that lingers long after the crowds go home. Sometimes you're summoned to another town. Congratulations, now you get to be the weird outsider with a bloody job and a funny accent. The pay, still bad. In the Middle Ages, travel is never glamorous, even if you aren't lugging a satchel of ominous tools and an air of doom. For the executioner, travel means trudging along muddy roads, dodging suspicious glances from peasants and priests alike, and arriving at your destination already tired, sore, and wishing you'd chosen a career in cheese making. Your only real perk is that no one tries to rob you. Even highwaymen believe in bad luck. When the summons comes, it's usually urgent. A letter arrives, delivered by a nervous messenger who can't make eye contact, informing you that the local hangman is indisposed, dead, sick, or possibly just hiding under his bed. Justice waits for no man, so pack your kit and hit the road. You double-check your axes, ropes, and travelling apron, which is only slightly less stained than your usual one. You hope for a smooth journey, but you know better. Arriving in a new town is always awkward. You step into the market square and it's clear you're not from around here. Maybe it's your clothes, your scent, a unique blend of sweat, lye soap and existential dread, or just the haunted look in your eyes. People whisper, point, and make the sign of the cross. Children hide behind barrels. Shopkeepers clutch their goods a little tighter, as if you might be here for an impromptu audit of their produce. Finding a place to stay is a challenge. The innkeeper smiles too widely and shows you to the smallest room at the far end of the hall, preferably one with a creaky bed, a single candle, and a window that won't open. The other guests give you a wide berth at supper, pushing the salt toward you as a ward against evil. If anyone dares to talk, it's only to ask if you've ever accidentally chopped off the wrong head. For the record, you haven't. Yet period. On execution day, you get a crash course in local politics. The sheriff tries to act tough but keeps sweating through his doublet. The mayor greets you with a speech about maintaining order and then asks if you'll accept a bonus in root vegetables instead of coin. The priest offers an extra long blessing, just in case your presence invites supernatural fallout. It's like being the guest of honour at a dinner party when nobody remembers inviting you. Your audience is just as welcoming. The locals crowd the square, eager to see how the imported executioner stacks up against their own. There's a subtle pressure to impress. Nobody wants to hear that the outsider made a mess of things. If you slip, stumble, or misjudge the distance, the story will travel faster than you do. You work quickly, efficiently, trying to be invisible and memorable at the same time. The goal is simple: get the job done and disappear before anyone can throw a cabbage or a curse. When it's over, you collect your meagre payment, minus mysterious travel expenses and accommodation surcharges. You buy some stale bread for the journey home, nod politely to the townsfolk who refuse to meet your gaze, and hit the road before anyone can ask for advice on ghosts, curses, or tax evasion. On the walk back, you reflect on the joys of being the itinerant executioner. Strange beds, colder dinners, and the unique experience of being disliked in more than one postal code. Your own village might shun you, but at least they know your name. In other towns, you're just the hangman from away, a necessary evil passing through like a storm cloud with shoes. But you do the job all the same, because in medieval life someone has to travel for work and you can't even expense the mileage. When you finally hang up your axe, what's left? A nervous village, a pile of bad jokes, and, if you're lucky, children who pick literally any other career path. Congratulations, you survived medieval human resources. The truth is, legacies are a tricky thing for medieval executioners. Most people leave behind a family crest, a favourite chair, maybe a nice recipe for rabbit stew. You leave behind stories whispered over cold ale, warnings muttered to unruly children, and a collection of stains no one will ever quite explain. People remember your work, but not your name. At least, not kindly. If you're lucky, they call you Old What's-His-Name, the one who didn't flinch. If you're not, you're that fellow who needed 3 swings, and that's your immortality. The village changes after you're gone. For a few days, everyone talks. Nervous, hushed tones, as if your shadow might still be lurking by the bakery. Some hope the next executioner will be less grim, less unlucky, less you. Others wonder if this is their chance to get away with a little more mischief. It's amazing how fast gossip moves when there's an opening for the most avoided position in town. Children hear the stories, exaggerated every time. You become a bogeyman for a generation. Behave, or the executioner will get you. You always knew you'd never be cast as the hero, but you hope to avoid being the villain in every bedtime story. Sometimes, a braver or less superstitious soul will whisper a different kind of memory. He was fair. He was kind to animals. He gave me half a loaf when no one else would. These are rare, but they're out there. You become myth and warning, morality tale and punchline all in one. If you had a family, they inherit your reputation. Your children learn to introduce themselves carefully, hoping nobody asks, "Are you related to?" Some leave town the moment they can, reinventing themselves as stable boys, merchants, or, if they're truly ambitious, minstrels in a neighbouring village, where no one knows what your last name means. You hope they never pick up an axe or learn to tie a noose. The best legacy you can offer is freedom from your own footsteps. Of course, there are more physical reminders. Your apron hangs by the hearth long after you're gone. The tools are stored away, but everyone remembers whose they were. The gallows in the square, weathered, stained, creaking in the wind, remains as a silent monument to your work and to the justice, or at least order, that you enforced. Legends grow in your absence. Some villagers swear your ghost still walks the night, hood up, eyes searching for unfinished business. Others claim you haunt the scaffold, silently inspecting the ropes and axe blades of your successor. It's not the afterlife you hoped for, but in a way it's something. Proof that even the most avoided person in town leaves a mark. Years pass, and your memory fades to rumour. The village eventually forgets the details but keeps the stories. New generations arrive, new scandals fill the air, and the job goes on. Another executioner takes your place. Another shadow fills the seat at the back of the church. Another name whispered in fear and necessity. It's a cycle, ancient as the village itself. And so, your legacy isn't glory or wealth, but a strange kind of endurance. You survived the world's least enviable job. You kept the peace, awkwardly, quietly, and always at a distance. Maybe your real legacy is this. Proof that even the outcasts, the awkward ones, the ones everyone avoids, hold the village together in their own invisible way. So when you're gone, and the next market day dawns a little quieter, you can rest knowing you did your part. Maybe, just maybe, that's the only legacy that matters. Ever wonder what a medieval performance review looks like? Spoiler, no quarterly bonuses or positive affirmation here. If the town council thinks you're doing well, they'll let you keep your job by not running you out of town. If they think you're slipping, expect feedback in the form of suspicious stares, whispered gossip, and the mayor suggesting, maybe try swinging with both hands next time. There's no suggestion box, just your neighbour loudly reminiscing about how the last executioner never missed and always brought cake. Improvement plans are simple. Do better, or the crowd gets a new face to jeer at. In medieval HR, you're always on probation, and the only thing guaranteed is more awkward silences at the bakery. Let's talk about management. In theory, you answer to the mayor, the sheriff, or the local lord, whoever collects the taxes and signs off on your wages, such as they are. In reality, you answer to a more terrifying boss, public opinion. Your real performance review happens every time you step onto the scaffold, and the review panel is the entire population of the village, including children, chickens, and the one-eyed cat, who always finds the softest spot in the square. If you're lucky, nobody throws anything. If you're unlucky, congratulations. Your rating just dropped from tolerated to fresh target. Forget about metrics and objectives. Medieval HR doesn't have a chart for executions completed on time, or customer satisfaction. Your feedback comes in 3 flavours. 1, the silent treatment. 2, loud, unhelpful advice shouted from the crowd. And 3, passive-aggressive gifts, like a slightly sharp axe left on your doorstep, or a loaf of bread that's just a little too stale to be an accident. The best you can hope for is to blend in, do your job, and avoid any new nicknames. Spoiler, you're not getting Employee of the Month. You're just hoping not to become Three-Swing Tom or Wobbly Rope Roger. If you mess up, the village doesn't send a polite letter or schedule a private chat. Instead, the mayor corners you at the market, voice lowered to a stage whisper that everyone can hear, and says, "We're hoping for a little more precision next time." The sheriff adds, "The crowds have noticed." Even the priest gives you a sideways look during Sunday's sermon. Suddenly everyone's got advice, from the blacksmith, "Try oiling the hinge, lad," to the baker, "You ever thought about switching arms?" The only person not offering pointers is the condemned, and they're not in a position to critique, unless you really mess up. Sometimes the feedback is more creative. One time, after a particularly difficult job, you find a drawing nailed to your door. a stick figure holding an axe and slipping on a banana peel. The children snicker behind fences. The adults pretend not to see. That's the medieval equivalent of a strongly worded email, just with more art and fewer spelling errors. There's also the annual budget review, where the council debates if they can afford to keep you on, or if they should outsource justice to the next village over. You sit in the back of the hall listening as your job security is measured against the price of Newmarket stalls and repairs to the mill. "Couldn't we just take turns?" someone suggests. "My cousin's pretty handy with a cleaver." Everyone laughs, except you. You take a mental note to avoid that cousin at the next harvest festival. No one ever asks how you're doing. There's no wellness check-in, no open-door policy. If you seem anxious or unsteady, the town solution is to pray for you. Or more likely, pray for a replacement. The only support system is your own sense of grim humour and the dog who greets you at the door no matter how many complaints the council has about your swing technique. In the end, medieval HR is less about growth and improvement and more about survival and public relations. You don't climb a corporate ladder, you cling to it, hoping nobody decides it's your turn at the other end of the rope. Each day you last is its own kind of achievement. No trophies, no bonus pay. Just another year as the most avoided, yet indispensable employee in town. And if you ever do get a compliment, cherish it. Write it down. Because in medieval HR, praise is rarer than a clean apron and twice as valuable. In modern times, networking means LinkedIn invites and awkward mixers. For you, it means nodding at the gravedigger, swapping rope tips with the jailer, and maybe a quiet drink with the town healer, because she's seen almost as much as you have, and also drinks as much as you do. Occasionally you spot another executioner at the regional fair. You two exchange the world's most uncomfortable handshake and a mutual look that says, "I get it." There's no guild, no union, just a handful of equally lonely souls comparing stains and stories before slipping back into the shadows. Your network is a list of people who'd rather not be seen talking to you in daylight. Let's be honest, in the medieval world your social circle is more of a triangle, and the corners are all a little sharp. The local gravedigger is your unofficial work spouse. You bump into him early on execution days. He's the only one who never averts his eyes, probably because he knows he'll see you again soon enough. Your conversations are short, practical, and always half-whispered. "So, how's the soil today?" "Soft enough. Wet patch by the big oak. Avoid it if you can." If you ever laugh together, it's at a joke nobody else in town would dare to repeat. In a place where everyone else looks through you, having someone who looks at you, even with mud on their boots and a haunted look in their eyes, almost counts as friendship. Then there's the jailer. He's the only person who understands your relationship with rope, knots, and the importance of a well-oiled lock. While others chat about weather or sheep, your small talk runs to topics like, "You ever tried double braiding for a cleaner break?" Or, "What do you do about prisoners who won't stop singing?" It's a technical conversation, but there's camaraderie and shared expertise. You don't swap birthday presents, unless you count the time he slipped you a new length of rope for emergencies. It was the medieval equivalent of a LinkedIn endorsement, but with more splinters. If you're lucky, you might have a quiet rapport with the town healer. She's the only other person who's seen as much blood as you, and she never flinches when you walk in covered in suspicious stains. Sometimes you find yourself sharing a flask on the back steps of the apothecary, swapping horror stories in the soft glow of dusk. She tells you about the time she pulled a turnip out of someone's nose. You recount your worst swing and a miss. It's less therapy and more mutual commiseration. Nobody else in town will listen anyway. You both know the value of discretion, and that's worth more than any fancy guild badge. Now and then you attend the regional fair. It's not for the games or the roast pig, though you're not above sneaking a sausage on a stick. It's the only chance you have to meet other executioners without it being weird. You recognise them by the tired eyes, the overly sturdy shoes, and the way they hover just outside the main crowd. The handshake is quick, a little clammy, and usually followed by a moment of silent understanding. "How many this year?" "More than last, less than next." Sometimes you exchange tips. Goose fat softens the leather. Don't trust a rope made on a Friday. Or you simply compare scars. It's a strange kinship, built not on trust, but on shared experience and the mutual knowledge that nobody else really understands. There are no secret meetings, no social clubs, no guild houses for you. The blacksmiths and bakers have their own secret handshakes and drinking songs, but your network is a collection of nods, shared tools, and awkward conversations at the edge of the market. On a good day, the town crier will give you a curt nod. On a bad day, you get an extra turnip thrown your way. Still, you persist. In a world that tries to pretend you don't exist, your little circle is a lifeline. Quiet, understated, but absolutely essential. So, while your medieval networking events don't come with name tags or free wine, you have your own version. Silent solidarity with those who live on society's edge, a few secret smiles, and just enough connection to remind you that, for all the isolation, you're not completely alone, even if nobody else will admit it. Most people dream of fan mail, thank you notes, baskets of bread, maybe the odd marriage proposal. Your mailbox is a treasure trove of hate notes, awkward confessions, and sometimes the occasional love letter from someone who's just a bit too interested in your rope collection. There's also the standard hex from a local witch, may your axe always dull, and your stew never thicken, and bizarre requests for lockets of hair, or, weirdest of all, autographed nooses. You try to be polite, but you keep the garlic and salt close, just in case. You might be shunned, but at least you're never bored. Let's start with the hate mail. Forget sealed envelopes and tasteful calligraphy. Your letters arrive scrawled on scraps of old parchment, sometimes written in what you sincerely hope is mud. They show up tucked under your door, wedged between firewood, or pinned dramatically to your fence with a chicken bone. The messages are short, sharp, and always anonymous. Move away, one suggests helpfully. You're cursed, another warns, as if you didn't already hear it 3 times a week at the bakery. The most creative? If I see you at the market, I'll throw something worse than eggs. You're not sure what that means, but you check your pockets a little more carefully these days. But it's not all threats and bad poetry. Occasionally, your fan mail takes a more dramatic turn. Hexes from local witches or the merely superstitious. You open a letter to find a tiny bag of herbs and a warning. May your boots fill with mud and your cat always shed. You get the sense that in medieval Europe, passive-aggressive curses are a form of small talk. You respond by hanging extra garlic above the door, adding another pinch of salt to your stew, and saying a quick prayer to whichever saint handles awkward correspondence. If nothing else, these gifts keep the rats out of your pantry for a week. Just when you think you've seen it all, the weird requests start rolling in. Some villagers believe a piece of the executioner's rope brings luck, so you're asked to cut off a length and sign it, as if you're a celebrity with a very niche audience. Once, a hopeful romantic asked for a lock of your hair, promising to keep it safe next to her collection of chicken feathers and mysterious bones. You're flattered, slightly alarmed, and suddenly very careful about sweeping up after a haircut. Another time, a merchant offered you 3 turnips for an old, blood-stained apron. He said it would keep thieves out of his shop. The next week, you heard he sold it for twice as much to a rival town's apothecary, who used it to ward off bad spirits and lowball offers. Of course, there are the confessions. The truly bold, or the truly guilty, sometimes send you anonymous notes confessing to minor crimes. It was me who took the last apple from the market barrel. Forgive me, I let my goat into your yard. You wonder what they expect in return. Mercy? Absolution? Or just someone to listen? You keep the notes in a little box, partly out of curiosity, partly because you figure if the sheriff ever needs evidence, you're sitting on the medieval world's most boring true crime archive, and, every so often, a love letter sneaks in. Smeared with ink and scented with something between wildflowers and old onions, it gushes over your strong hands and mysterious eyes. Sometimes you wonder if it's a joke, or if someone in town truly admires the person who swings the axe for a living. Romance is complicated enough without wondering if your secret admirer is after your heart, or just your collection of gallows souvenirs. Either way, you read the letters, blush a little, and then tuck them away somewhere safe, just in case you ever need proof that once upon a time someone in this town didn't hate you. Fan mail in the medieval world is never dull. Hate, hope, curses and confessions. Each note is a reminder that, even as the outcast, you're living rent-free in the village's imagination. You might be shunned at supper, but your mailbox is always full. In a way, it's the ultimate medieval compliment. Nobody ever writes to the boring cheesemaker. You'd be amazed what turns up after an execution. Shoes, hats, a suspiciously heavy coin purse, sometimes even a whole chicken. Don't ask. There's always a debate. Do you return these things, keep them, or add them to the growing pile of evidence in your cottage? The truth is, lost and found is a grey area. Some villagers whisper that taking anything from the scaffold brings bad luck. Others show up a week later, asking if you've seen a silver locket, last worn by a relative, before. You sigh, hand over what you've found, and add another notch to the ledger of awkward post-job encounters. Let's be real. When you're the medieval executioner, every day ends with some sort of bizarre clean-up duty, and not just the kind that stains your boots. As the crowd drifts away, you're left to survey the scaffold like a school janitor after a particularly rowdy assembly. At first, it's all the obvious stuff. A bit of rope, a muddy hat, the odd wooden shoe, always just one. Never the pair, because that would be too easy. Then there are the truly unexpected discoveries. A loaf of bread half-eaten in the commotion, a child's toy dropped by some poor soul who didn't realise bring your kid to Justice Day was a terrible idea, and yes, once, an actual chicken. It ran off mid-execution and nobody ever claimed it, so now you have a pet named Poultrygeist. It's a delicate business. Technically, anything found on or near the scaffold is yours to deal with, either because it belonged to the condemned, was dropped by the crowd, or simply got left behind in the general panic. Some things are easy to return. You find a scarf, you hand it back to the shivering woman lurking at the edge of the square. But what about the heavier stuff? That coin purse, clearly lost by the condemned in the chaos, or the nice pair of gloves you just know belong to the mayor, because he's the only one in town with fingers that stubby and fabric that fancy. There are, of course, superstitions. The village whispers say the scaffold is cursed ground. Anything you take from it carries the echo of doom. Leave a hat, lose your luck. Take a coin, invite bad dreams. This is convenient for you when it comes to cleaning up after an execution, since most villagers are happy to let you keep the leftovers. But every so often, someone gets bold. A week or two later, they show up at your door, shifting from foot to foot, eyes fixed on your boots. Have you by chance found a locket? Silver, heart-shaped, last seen on my cousin, who, well, you know. You try not to sigh out loud as you fish through your collection of mementos. Another awkward handoff, another awkward silence, and another reason the village kids dare each other to touch your doorstep. Occasionally things get complicated. A ring goes missing during the event. Now you're the prime suspect. Never mind that you have enough trouble keeping track of your own possessions, let alone pilfering jewellery from the condemned. You do your best to return things, if only to keep the peace, but there's always a sense that no good deed goes unpunished. Return the coin purse. The owner swears it's lighter than when he lost it. Give back a cloak. Suddenly everyone thinks you're wearing their dead uncle's best tunic, even though you couldn't fit into it if you tried. Sometimes you're tempted to just pile everything into a box marked unclaimed and put it outside your door with a sign. Take what you want, but beware the curse. The truth is, the lost and found of the scaffold is less about objects and more about memories. Each item carries a story, a reminder of a day everyone would rather forget. You're the unlikely caretaker of the village's unwanted baggage, literal and otherwise. By the end of the week, the evidence pile in your cottage is a strange museum. Muddy boots, a bent spoon, a child's wooden whistle, half a sausage, nibbled but not finished, and the occasional unlucky hat. None of it brings you joy. Most of it brings you questions you'd rather not answer. And so, You keep sweeping, sorting, and silently wondering if maybe, just once, someone will leave behind something actually useful, like a map to a better job. Until then, you're the medieval lost and found, and business is regrettably always booming. Every so often, the village bands together, torches, pitchforks, and the loudest voices in town, begging for a last-minute pardon. Sometimes it's genuine. Sometimes it's just the local bard looking for material. You stand awkwardly on the scaffold while the mayor and priest argue, the condemned's family pleads, and the baker offers bribes of extra crunchy bread if you look the other way. You nod, wait, and do your best impression of a statue. In the end, the law wins, usually, and you're left with a crowd twice as angry and half as willing to sell you decent cheese. Pro tip: never accept crowdsourced pottage. You never know what's in it. Petition Day is the medieval equivalent of a surprise group project that nobody wanted, and you're the one holding the red pen. You wake up to the sound of distant shouting and the distinct aroma of burning torchwood. Before you've finished your watery ale, the village square is packed. Neighbours, friends, distant cousins, and that one guy who just likes yelling. It's a full-on medieval flash mob, complete with angry hand gestures and at least 3 misspelled banners. Some are waving petitions, others are waving chickens. A few are just here for the drama. You're just hoping the wind doesn't shift and blow smoke into your face before breakfast. The condemned is suddenly the town's favourite person. Overnight they're transformed from that scoundrel who stole my goat to poor misunderstood Thomas, the pride of the parish. The local bard strums a sorrowful tune. Kids chant rhymes, and someone's grandmother sobs so loudly you can hear her from the scaffold. If you're lucky, the mayor has a plan. If you're not, he's hiding behind the town crier, praying someone else makes the final call. The priest, meanwhile, is in full save the soul mode, gesturing at the heavens and quoting scripture with a volume that would shame a thunderstorm. He alternates between pleading for mercy and reminding everyone of the dire consequences of undermining divine and legal order. Sometimes he'll try to outshout the crowd. Other times he's whispering to the condemned's mother, promising to pray harder if she donates more eggs next Sunday. Medieval negotiation, part sermon, part barter, part theatrical spectacle. Then there's you, the accidental centre of attention. All eyes turn to you as if you have the power to simply declare, "All right, you win, everyone go home." You don't. Your job is to wait, motionless, while the world's least organised town hall plays out on the cobblestones. The condemned's family pleads directly, faces wet with tears and snot, making promises nobody intends to keep. If you let him go, we'll pay his debts, fix the mayor's fence, and name our next child after you. Tempting, but you know better. Last time someone promised that, you spent 6 months dodging a child named Hangman Henry, who screamed every time he saw you. The bribes start innocently enough. The baker, always looking for leverage, sidles up with a loaf of bread so tough you could shingle a roof with it. "Just drop the axe, yeah?" The butcher offers suspicious sausages. Someone from the far end of the crowd mutters about homemade mead. The offers get weirder the longer you stand there. Last week someone tried to trade you a goat. You declined, politely, but you're pretty sure that goat still holds a grudge. Sometimes the mayor tries to restore order, raising his arms and calling for calm while secretly hoping someone else takes responsibility. The crowd doesn't care. They want a show, or at least a reason to tell the next village how they stood up to injustice. The noise swells, and for a moment you wonder if this will be the day the mob overruns the scaffold and drags you off for a taste of your own medicine. It's a career hazard. One bad swing, one unpopular execution, and suddenly the petitions are about you. But in the end, the law usually prevails. The Lord's seal is produced, the priest says one last prayer, and the sheriff, who spent most of the morning looking for his courage, finally gives you the signal. You do your job as quickly and quietly as you can, knowing that half the crowd will hold it against you forever, and the other half will pretend they never knew the condemned at all. Afterward the square empties, but the tension lingers. The cheese at the market is a little pricier. The glare's a little colder, and the pottage, if you dare to accept it, tastes vaguely of revenge and regret. But that's life as the executioner. Sometimes you're up against the law, sometimes the mob, and sometimes the world's most menacing loaf of bread. What does a day off mean for you? Not much. There's no spa, no countryside retreat, just a rare morning where nobody's calling for your services. You spend it fixing leaks, patching your shoes, and enjoying the luxury of not being stared at in the square. Maybe you take the dog for a walk. Maybe you just nap in the sun until a messenger arrives, face pale, breathless, and very apologetic. Sorry to bother you, but just like that, your me time is over. Medieval work-life balance, you work, life judges, and the only time off is when someone else draws the short straw. The medieval day off is more of a rumour than an actual event. Most jobs in the Middle Ages blur the line between work and life, but for the executioner, time off is a logistical puzzle. You're always on call? No, really, always. There's no set schedule, no posted hours. The only calendar is the one in the mayor's head, and if he forgets, congratulations, you might get a whole afternoon to yourself. No one brings you a cake to celebrate your personal day. In fact, most people are surprised you have any free time at all. The village just quietly expects you to exist in a cupboard somewhere, ready to pop out with an axe the moment things get tense. On your rare day off, the silence is both gift and curse. At first, you don't quite know what to do with yourself. There's no crowd gathering, no anxious sheriff pacing outside your door, no priest rehearsing last rites in the square. You hear only the regular clatter of village life. Cows mooing, children squabbling over marbles, someone's goat enthusiastically redecorating a neighbour's fence. For a brief moment, you can almost imagine you're a normal villager, just another soul with chores to do and time to kill. The reality, though, is that your to-do list never shrinks. Your roof leaks, your shoes are more whole than leather, and your axe, yes, even on your day off, needs another round of sharpening. You spend an hour mending your only cloak, then a second hour convincing the dog to stop chewing on your best, only pair of socks. The afternoon sun peeks out, and for a fleeting moment you allow yourself to nap in its warmth, stretched out on a patch of grass that isn't soaked in medieval regrets. If you're feeling bold, you try to run errands, shopping at the market, maybe buying a chunk of cheese or some onions. But the village doesn't really let you relax, even on your own time. You still get the stares, the whispers, the sudden hush when you approach the bread stall. Nobody's buying your just a regular day routine. The fishmonger gives you a knowing nod. The baker watches you with the caution usually reserved for wild dogs and badly aging sausages. You try to shrug it off, focusing on the tiny victories. Today at least, nobody's asked you to swing anything sharper than a knife for slicing cheese. Sometimes, on the rarest of rare days, you escape to the woods. You walk your dog down overgrown paths, picking wild berries, or just enjoying the simple pleasure of not being watched. Even the birds seem less judgmental out here. You daydream about what you'd do with a real holiday. Imagine a week at the coast, fishing for something besides acceptance. Maybe even reading a book if you could find one that isn't about local hangings. Inevitably, though, relaxation is a short-lived luxury. You're halfway through patching your roof, or halfway through a nap when there's a frantic knock at the door. The messenger, usually the mayor's youngest nephew who lost a bet, stands there, hat in hand, out of breath and apologising before he even speaks. There's been a brawl at the tavern, or someone's livestock is missing, or the mayor just remembers an old debt that needs collecting. With your particular skill set, you sigh, dust yourself off, and get ready. In the medieval world, your day off ends the moment someone else's trouble begins. So you head back out, feeling the sun on your back and the weight of your job settling onto your shoulders once again. Medieval time off isn't about recharging. It's about savouring the few quiet moments between chaos. Work-life balance? More like work-life juggling with the occasional nap. And in the end, your only real vacation is knowing there's always next week. Maybe, if the village can survive that long without you. After a long day, you crave escape. The trouble is, books are rare, literacy even rarer, and most scrolls are either sermons or tax records. Still, you do your best. You borrow old saints' lives from the priest, carefully, with gloves, or swap for the jailer's dog-eared manual of knots and ropes. You invent stories for your children, fables about clever foxes and brave mice, because nobody wants a bedtime tale about public hangings. Every so often, a traveller passes through and leaves behind a battered chapbook. You treasure it, even if the only story is how to milk a goat in 6 easy steps, because in your world, a little imagination is the closest you'll get to an escape plan. Books in medieval life are less hobby and more holy relic. You can't just pop into the village library, mostly because there isn't one. If you're lucky, the church keeps a few volumes chained to the altar, pages turned soft and shiny from a generation of trembling hands. But those aren't really light reading. The stories inside are equal parts miracle, martyrdom, and dire warnings about what happens if you skip morning prayers or laugh too loudly in the square. You read them anyway, squinting at the faded Latin and hoping you're not accidentally cursing yourself. Then there's the tax records. The thrilling adventures of how many sheep did old Walter owe the Lord this year. You've read them all, mostly out of boredom and mild curiosity. Sometimes you spice things up by pretending you're the inspector from a faraway land, sent to catch clever villagers in the act of potato smuggling. It's not exactly high adventure, but in a world with no Netflix, you take what you can get. If you're resourceful, and let's be honest, the medieval executioner has to be, you trade for reading material wherever you can find it. The jailer is your best bet. He owns a battered manual of knots and ropes, complete with diagrams that look more like abstract art than practical advice. Still, it passes the time, and you memorize every page, just in case you ever need to tie something, or someone, in a new and inventive way. The local healer sometimes lends you a scroll about herbs and remedies. Half the text is smudged, but you now know 17 ways to cure a headache, most involving onions, leeches, or an enthusiastic slap to the forehead. When the rare traveller stops in town and leaves behind a chapbook, it's like winning the medieval lottery. Maybe the story is about a knight fighting a dragon, or a merchant's unlucky love affair with a goat. Maybe it's just instructions for building a better chicken coop. Either way, you treasure it. You read it aloud at home, voices raised and dramatic, giving your children and your dog a taste of distant worlds and silly heroes. It doesn't matter if the plot is nonsense. Every page is a portal to somewhere else. Of course, you make up most of your own stories. Your kids want bedtime tales, but you know better than to recount the day's work. So you spin fables. The fox who outsmarts the hounds, the mouse who saves a princess, the brave hedgehog who becomes king by accident but still. These stories are half invention, half memory of your own parents' tales, passed down in flickering candlelight. You let your imagination run wild, because if you don't, the only stories left are the ones the villagers whisper about you after dark. Every so often you get bold and try your hand at writing. Your script is clumsy, your ink homemade, and your parchment recycled from old tax rolls. But there's a strange satisfaction in seeing your own words, your own stories take shape. Maybe nobody else will ever read them, but in a world where escape is a luxury, even a single page is worth its weight in gold. So your library is small, ragtag, and deeply personal. A few borrowed saints' lives, a manual of knots, a handful of chapbooks, and your own secret stash of bedtime fables. It's not much, but it's yours. And in the quiet hours of the night, after the villagers finally stopped whispering, you escape into stories that remind you, if only for a few pages, that there's more to life than rope and regret. And that's the day done. Your hands are shaking, your boots are sticky, and your conscience is somewhere in the moat. Sleep tight, knowing you are one bad swing away from a riot. Thanks for listening, and if you're still awake, consider subscribing for more mildly horrifying bedtime stories from history. Good night, and may your dreams be executioner-free.